All right, well, go for it. We're live.
Okay. Hi, this is Bernie Thompson from Plugable Technologies. So we're back in our live office hours again. And I'm actually at the office instead of at home. And I've got Josh with me. Josh, you're at home, right?
Yeah, I'm at home in my home office / lab.
Yeah. So yeah, we could analyze all the cool things back there. I think I see the Glowforge
Yes.
back in the corner. Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Glowforge and a couple 3D printers and electronics test station right behind me.
Oh, that's so cool. We actually have a company, Glowforge, as Josh knows, and it actually we lent it to the nearby high school robotics team, and it's actually getting used to cut out face covers for medical providers right now by the high school robotics team, which is
That's so cool.
Yeah. We welcome everybody, and would love to have any of the questions that you have. Either we're broadcasting right now on Facebook and YouTube, and actually also Amazon Live for the first time this week. So if you post any of your questions up, we would love to answer them. But one topic came up this week that's kind of a continuation of some of the things that we've been talking about in past office hours, and that is kind of the confusing set of options that you have with USB-C in terms of what technology to use to connect extra displays. Josh is a great one to kind of be with us talking about this. When USB-C first came along, we had, prior to USB-C, already been doing all of these same kind of products with docks and adapters to be able to connect actually many additional monitors. And even with USB-A, you can connect today up to 6 monitors that we support. In some quirky situations, you can actually go up to a lot more. And we've got this kind of popular video on YouTube that you could look back at where we did 14 monitors, and actually Josh helped, with that setup too. But when USB-C came, we said, well, how can we do something really innovative with what USB-C offers? And this is, this is 2014, 2015. I don't actually remember the exact time frame. And what we did was the Plugable UD-Alt-CDL, which is a triple display dock that's actually already been out for a bunch of years, that we did as a Kickstarter originally. And this turned into actually, not a wildly successful Kickstarter, but turned out to be an extremely successful product on the market. And what's interesting about this product is it did something kind of a few years ahead of a lot of other people doing the exact same thing, which is it uses a mix of DisplayPort over USB-C, which is kind of native, DisplayPort signaling right over the USB copper, and DisplayLink technology, which is this display technology that puts in a sense, the graphics adapter in the dock, and only the pixels that are changing come over USB, and then the actual dock hardware is the one refreshing the monitor that's attached to it. So this UD-Alt-CDL dock, which again is actually our #2 best-selling dock still today, uses a combination of those two technologies. But potentially, kind of really confusing. So what's the pros and cons of doing it the USB-C way versus the DisplayLink way? And actually the answers kind of get quite complicated. But so Josh, can we get 3 displays off of just DisplayPort over USB-C without using DisplayLink technology today?
Unfortunately, we can't. USB-C DisplayPort alternate mode is a really powerful technology, but there are definitely some limitations. Some systems with USB-C, of course, don't even offer that technology. And then a lot of systems that do may have maybe some potential compatibility issues to worry about. A lot of the early systems with USB-C and alt mode were not very reliable. And then even some of the new bleeding edge systems that are just coming out are also having some issues. But For the most part, getting that single display up to 4K 30 hertz from the alt mode usually just works. But you need that DisplayLink technology to get additional outputs.
Yeah, so and that's absolutely, all of that is exactly right. And so let's actually kind of go a level deeper and talk about how these technologies work and kind of what the pros and cons are and where they come from. So you were just saying that the USB-C, the DisplayPort over USB-C technology can be troublesome. So let's kind of talk about why. So one thing is, with DisplayLink, does the laptop maker have to do anything to make DisplayLink work versus DisplayPort over USB-C? Does the laptop maker have to do something to make that work? Well, what's the difference between those two?
Sure. DisplayLink is great because for most Windows systems, you just install the DisplayLink drivers, and the drivers handle all of the kind of behind the scenes things that need to happen to make that technology function. So for a Windows system, DisplayLink kind of just works in most cases once the drivers are installed, and assuming there's no other underlying Windows or other driver issues.
And if it doesn't work, it's a software issue, not a hardware issue, right? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. The DisplayLink doesn't really require any specific hardware other than a certain level of processing power and memory and things like that. Whereas the DisplayPort over USB-C, the alternate mode, it needs underlying hardware support, and on top of just the hardware, that's being backed by complex firmware and UEFI BIOS, all sorts of really complex technologies that kind of have to fall in line to make that work and be supported properly.
Yeah, and the reason why that's happening is because DisplayPort over USB-C, the way that spec works is you're actually negotiating for the control of the copper in the USB-C wire, and you're running the DisplayPort signaling straight from the GPU in your laptop over that wiring. And so from the laptop maker's point of view, like let's take an Intel GPU. It has a total of, all the recent ones have had a total of 3 graphics outputs. One's going to the screen, and then the laptop maker has to, carefully, with their PCB design on the laptop, route, one of those other 2 remaining outputs to the USB-C port, or in the case of Thunderbolt 3, sometimes both of the 2 remaining outputs to the USB-C port. If they've got multiple USB-C ports on the system, they've got to put in some kind of mux and ability to switch and route it to either of the 2 ports, physically, hardware-wise, route it. And then like you were saying, gosh, there's a lot of also firmware and other things involved because this uses USB-C's alternate mode capability. So before any of this kind of routing and kind of taking control of copper can happen, there's a software negotiation happening that's part of the way the USB-C spec works, where they connect first as simple USB devices, and then they ask each other, do you support this alternate mode? Do you support this alternate mode? Oh, great, let's use it. And and that's DisplayPort over USB-C. So there can be variability in the quality of the laptop maker's implementation, either at that kind of software level of negotiating about what each side does, or at the hardware level of just kind of signal integrity and noise. A lot of laptops are having to put in repeaters, signal repeaters or signal boosters in order to get that DisplayPort signal across the laptop PCB to the connector and then out over the USB cable. And we often say when it comes to kind of signaling and kind of signal integrity issues, it's it's kind of the sum total of all the errors. The error from the GPU to the out across the PCB to the port on your laptop, the connector, and then the cable, and then finally the dock. And then in the case of DisplayPort, there's usually some amount of boosting in the dock, or there might be conversion in the dock to HDMI, but still then there's another hop to the monitor. So one of the interesting things you've had a chance to do, Josh, is actually go to there's a USB standards body called USBIF where they do a lot of the low-level testing, and some of the low-level testing is kind of around these signal integrity issues and trying to find problems and kind of looking at the total amount of error and the total amount of latency in the signal. A lot of that summarized down to what's called an eye diagram of kind of seeing if through the system the signal has kind of maintained integrity. So I don't know if have you ever seen anything like really kind of fall on its face and really have problems in terms of that testing at one of those test events?
A little bit. When I was, I think not specifically the USBIF event, but at one of the Thunderbolt events, they were running some tests on hardware in the different testing suites. And the eye test that you mentioned, the return loss testing, is that's a really important one, because there's basically a certain threshold where things will work and then things won't work. But sometimes you'll see something that's right on kind of that edge of it might work or it may actually fail. And a lot of times that just comes down to just pure signal interference. If the cables are all short enough, it might work, but if you use a longer cable, that eye test may fail, and then the DisplayPort link can't actually happen somewhere in that process. The negotiation fails, and either the computer says no, or the dock can't get a signal. There's varying degrees of what happens, but even things such as like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth signals can actually cause external interference with these USB-C DisplayPort signals and cause that to break down. So there were definitely examples where a piece of hardware was connected and they would run a test and it wouldn't pass. And they'd have to go back and do either a new hardware revision or try and clean it up in firmware somehow.
Yeah. So in the chat, Sancha asked a really good question, which is, so DisplayPort over USB-C, does it provide the same level of performance and features as a standard DisplayPort connection? And so there's kind of, I think, two levels to that question. Is there the same number of lanes available? And then the other question is, okay, we've got the question of features, but we were just talking about kind of reliability. Is there any reliability difference between kind of connecting through a whole bunch of hops with USB-C versus it only being a DisplayPort cable?
I mean, generally speaking, if you can use less hops, that's of course going to be ideal, and I think overall will be the most reliable. But I think for most, situations, going through USB-C is about as reliable. It's just edge cases come up where that just isn't the case. But I think for most consumers, with a modern system with USB-C, getting a DisplayPort signal out through the C port, through a dock to their monitor, shouldn't be a huge issue. But in terms of pure reliability, definitely going through just a direct DisplayPort is ideal. But there's a lot of cases where that's just not possible. Laptops don't usually put a full-size DisplayPort connector on them anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. When we do have reliability problems and we're using and we notice that a customer has a long USB-C cable, what's one of the first things that we try kind of out of our own product line in order to debug that? Sure.
I mean, usually when we encounter an issue with a docking station, specifically, USB-C, and maybe the DisplayPort video over C isn't working, usually the first question I ask is, are you using the cable that the dock shipped with? Because that's a great way to just kind of use as a sanity check. All right, we know the 1 meter cable that's pretty average that we ship should pretty much just always work. But I've seen cases where, maybe a 2 meter cable or even longer will be used, or just a cable that's not the right spec. Unfortunately, USB-C, with all of its awesome features, has also added a little bit of complexity in that not all USB-C cables are created the same. Some may have poor shielding, some don't even have all the pins connected. So kind of going back to the basics and starting with just let's use the cable the dock shipped with and kind of go from there. That's usually where the issues lie, is cables most of the time.
And then occasionally when we get into a really confusing case where, you know, things really should be working, you know, they are already using the cable that came with the unit. Sometimes we'll actually try swapping in our Thunderbolt 3 cables for the customer. And in fact, we have a lot of customers who smartly, when they have a setup that they've had trouble with, or they just really want to make sure that it works, they'll actually buy our Thunderbolt 3 cables as a replacement for the USB-C cables they already have. And the reason why that actually matters is because the Thunderbolt 3 cables are spec'd and tested to a kind of a much higher level of signal integrity, basically the line quality of the copper and the connectors and all of that. And so if you're just on that margin, like Josh was talking about, that little thing can make a difference. And especially if you want a longer cable, like we sell a 0.8 meter Thunderbolt 3 cable, and you know, at the, you know, like that versus a 1 meter regular kind of cheapo USB cable, there will actually be quite a bit of difference actually in the signal integrity between those two things. So we were talking then about this whole other way of achieving the same goal, which is DisplayLink. So does DisplayLink have, we've been having all these discussions of signal integrity. Does DisplayLink have any signal integrity issues of the kind that we're talking about here, where, you know, cabling, you know, just makes it kind of not work at all, or how common is that relatively with DisplayLink?
That's one of the nice things about DisplayLink is that's almost never an issue. The only times we really see issues with DisplayLink and signal integrity thing is, you know, if say you're trying to run a really long USB 3 connection for DisplayLink, but we have customers using DisplayLink connected docks or just graphics adapters, using anywhere from, you know, 3 to 6 foot long cables without really any issues. And because of how DisplayLink is, as you mentioned earlier, you know, they're kind of only updating the pixels that are needing to be updated. That means that the amount of bandwidth that's being used at any given time is a lot less than, say, like DisplayPort, where it's pretty much refreshing everything all the time. So DisplayLink as a technology is really quite remarkable in what it can do over a lot less bandwidth and over much more simple cable.
Yeah, because for normal application use, you know, you're actually not updating a high percentage of the pixels on the screen at any given moment. A lot of these display technologies that we're talking about here, ultimately at the display, they're refreshing at usually 60 hertz, which means 60 times a second, you're refreshing every pixel on that screen, which is a really high rate of update and a lot of data that needs to go over the cable. And that's how a DisplayPort over USB-C works. All of that data is going over the USB cable. Whereas with DisplayLink, only the pixels that are changing, and at a kind of a much lower frequency, you know, that's the only data going over the cable. And so, yeah, it's just a lot less data. And so then that enables them to send the data in a totally different way, which is actually just very standard USB data packets. They're literally called bulk packets at the USB technology level. And these packets have you send the packets, and there's a checksum, a check that it arrived correctly, and there's a retry mechanism if it fails. And because the DisplayLink hardware is the one refreshing the screen kind of on the other end of the USB wire. So I don't have a good example here that I can grab on my desk, but you know, so you go from your laptop to the DisplayLink dock or graphics adapter, and then it is refreshing the screen. As long as it doesn't lose power, your screen is going to keep refreshing. There's no way that kind of errors or signal integrity on the USB side can affect things. And then the data that is going over USB is going via this kind of like very reliable mechanism, the exact same mechanism all your other USB devices use, like, you know, your flash drives and your USB hard drives. It's actually literally using the exact same mechanism. So it's the way DisplayLink ends up kind of behaving from a consumer point of view is if you don't run into any software troubles, it's going to be extremely reliable from a hardware perspective. But there's a software driver required. And on certain platforms, for example, today on Mac, there's a lot of churn and turnover with the DisplayLink software drivers. Whereas on Windows, where it's been kind of baked into Windows 10, it's extremely stable, and we actually are rarely, hitting problems there. Although actually, interestingly, there's one going around in email this week where there's a Microsoft Teams issue, because Microsoft Teams must be using some little nook and cranny of DirectX technology probably in their video processing, and then that's causing a software problem, which is kind of affecting the DisplayLink devices. But from a in a sense, a hardware perspective, there's no problem at all. The DisplayLink devices are very reliable. Mm-hmm. So wow, a lot of kind of confusing and interesting, pros and cons. So in reality, when you're having a problem with a customer and the customer is kind of like flexible to, potentially even swap out and try a different device, is it sometimes the right answer to, actually kind of intentionally switch which type of technology you're using in order to just kind of, get a working setup and get a problem solved?
Definitely, especially with issues where there may be a software component that's troublesome, like you mentioned with the Microsoft Teams. Sometimes issues like that aren't fully understood, and it'll take collaboration between DisplayLink and Microsoft to kind of work through those things. So when we encounter scenarios like that, sometimes we can look to alternatives. Why just this last month, I had a customer with a Microsoft Teams issue that you just spoke of, where our end solution was actually just to return the DisplayLink based dock, and he was fortunate enough to have a system with full Thunderbolt 3 support. So he actually picked up one of our Thunderbolt 3 docks to use instead, kind of just bypassing the problem using another method. And every situation, of course, will be different, different issues, different solutions. But a lot of times, because there are these different technologies, we're usually always able to get a kind of a working solution, be it a different dock or using a different output on the dock. Sometimes it's just tweaking a software setting. Zoom meetings actually sometimes has troubles as well, but there's a setting just to flip to turn off hardware acceleration, and everything works just fine.
Yeah, and so there's two things about what you just said that are interesting. One is that we do. I mean, so we have a very wide product line. So out of all these technologies that we're talking about, DisplayLink, which is this USB-based technology that's been around for 10 years, that works over standard USB, kind of any USB connection, whether it's A or C. And then we have DisplayPort over USB-C, and then we have Thunderbolt 3, and then coming up we have USB 4, which there's some questions coming about in the chat, which is great. So we have all these different versions, and I mean, other than USB 4, which isn't here yet, our product line encompasses all of them. We've got options in each of the categories, and in fact, we have some products that achieve some amazing things by combining some of those categories. And then the other thing that we do is, so we're always focused at Plugable on better products, better information, better support. This stuff is confusing, and so we try to put really great information out on our product pages. We have detailed, frequently asked questions, and we have forums. And you'll notice on our Amazon listings that we're very willing, and in fact, we try really hard to actually say not just what does work, but what doesn't work also, because we want you to have that information. And then, I mean, it's still a lot for anybody to absorb. If you do end up having a problem, just email us, email support@plugable.com, and we will do things like just swap units and or find the software setting. And because we sell 500,000 products a year, chances are we've seen your problem before, and we'll be able to come back with a solution. And the people coming back with that solution are all US-based customer support. So Josh, who right here on the call, is right here in Redmond, Washington, which is where I am also at our at our main office. All of our technical support people are right here in the U.S., right here in Redmond, Washington. So it's the kind of support that is hard to get from really any other company. We don't have a call center. You cannot call us, and that's the trade-off that we kind of have to make to achieve that. But when you email us, the same people who are involved in developing the products are the ones who will be supporting you. So we're able to get you kind of quick and accurate answers. Great. So back a ways, it's been a really great discussion. I hope we can actually catch up with all the questions. Joe BT was asking about kind of getting more displays and kind of going back to our original discussion of could you get 3 displays in any way with DisplayPort over USB-C. And so DisplayLink can do it because DisplayLink is this virtual graphics technology. Because it's using standard USB packets, you can just keep connecting more and more adapters and actually multiple docks, and they'll keep working. With DisplayPort over USB-C, there is a way to do it, but it requires an extension to the DisplayPort spec called MST, multiple stream technology. Today, Windows systems support MST, Mac systems do not. And that's actually held back the industry quite a bit in terms of adopting MST. But also, unfortunately, the other reason, and actually part of the reason why Apple doesn't support MST, is because there's a lot of compatibility quirks within MST. Today, Plugable actually does not have any MST products, and it's not for the lack of trying. It's because we have a really strong quality bar. I guess, the same thing happened with Apple, where we've evaluated MST a whole bunch of times, and each time kind of came to the conclusion that, wow, there are too many corner cases here where different devices won't work. And we think we've found an answer, and we've got some products coming up that are actually going to use MST technology in order to get multiple displays, even without DisplayLink and just using DisplayPort over USB-C. But it has meant that in order to do that and do that in a way that is going to be kind of simple, reliable enough that we can simply say it'll work, we've had to make some simplifications, basically. And the main simplification is all of the outputs of a dock that would do that, for example, have to be HDMI, because if we kind of combine DisplayPort's ability to hop with MST, we just run into a world of trouble, especially with older DisplayPort monitors. Mm-hmm. So you'll actually see for the first time MST products coming from us this year with that kind of care on our side to make sure that nothing's broke. Okay, great. So Mona Lisa asked, I have both a Mac laptop and an iMac. I understand there are 2 different host systems, but what technologies would you recommend so that I can use both my iMac and my laptop as an additional screen? Okay, great. In most cases, outside of the Apple world, you cannot use your laptop screen or like an all-in-one, like a computer like the iMac, as an external monitor. However, Apple actually has some special solutions, or at least they used to in this area. Now, I don't know. I'm out of date in this area actually myself. I don't know if you're up to date on this stuff, Josh.
Kind of. Apple actually used to have a really cool feature where iMacs could run in, I think they call it target display mode, where you would feed it a video signal from an external source. Apple actually has ditched that on their new iMacs. I think primarily just because the new iMac's screen is such an incredibly high resolution, you can't drive it externally without some really elaborate setup. So they just kind of removed that feature. There's other technologies for Macs that can kind of share screens, I think, over like Wi-Fi, and it's doing some sort of software solution. But there's no good way that I know of currently with newer generation iMacs to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and again, Plugable doesn't really have any products to help with that. In the end, really the best answer in most of those cases is, just get in my case like just two nice external displays, and then no matter what happens in terms of you over the years as you change laptops and change systems, the rest of your desktop setup, including often your dock, can stay the same. So like if you have a USB-C dock, that especially a simple setup like a USB-C dock with just one display, you'll be able to buy that display and get your desk really nice. And then even if you're changing your computer over the years, and that is one of the really nice things about USB-C and the standardization, that same setup should work for kind of any upcoming system, whether it be Mac or Windows, as long as it has a USB-C port. Great. Okay, so going down the questions. Katie asked, what should I look for when buying a USB-C cable to know what it's capable of? Yeah, this is actually a super important and really confusing question. It used to be with USB cables that pretty much, every cable was the same. Like in USB 2, those cables only had 4 wires in them, and they were always the same, whether you were getting that cable or whether the cable came with a charger or whether it came with a device. With USB-C, unfortunately, USB-C is a complicated technology with a complicated cable. There's actually 24 pins. I think I got that number right. Correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, on a USB-C connector. And unfortunately, there's a lot of cables out there. Some are charging only cables. Some are charging plus data. And then some are charging plus data at a, capable of supporting Thunderbolt 3. And there's also a lot of other kind of like feature things within that in terms of 3 amp and 5 amp. And it's really confusing. So number one rule, and Josh mentioned it earlier in the call, use the cable that came with your device, because that's, if you just pick unfortunately with USB-C, if you just pick a random cable out of a bin, you could be picking up the charge-only cable that Apple themselves, for example, have shipped with many devices. And guess what? Nothing that involves displays or any USB data devices is going to work, even though the cable looks the same as any other USB cable. Really frustrating. Or if you've lost and you don't have that cable that came with your device, companies like Plugable, like us, when we sell any USB cable, whether it's with a device or as a separate cable, and we sell both Thunderbolt cables and USB-C cables, we put a tag on the cable. Let's see, I showed it last office hours. I don't know if I have it here. Oh, if you have one, there you go.
Yeah.
So I hold it up a little bit closer. That I think it's glaring and it's hard to see, but basically, we do two things. On one side, we put the full specs of the cable, so you know exactly what that cable does and doesn't do. And on the other side, we put in a web link, so that you can just tap that in and see exactly what the capabilities of that cable is. So I kind of think of it as the random bin of cables, problem, which I have experienced thousands of times in my life. That I develop. It's kind of like. Between that and dust bunnies in my house, I don't know. I accumulate both, I think, but certainly once you've accumulated these bins of cables, it really stinks to with USB-C, because you reach in and you have an unlabeled cable and you don't really know what you have and what will work or not work with that cable. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Josh. It's a universal problem.
It's a huge problem. So we've been kind of proactive and tried to mark most of our cables so that you know what it is. And then there's sometimes you might not know what your device needs. And then in those cases, I guess kind of a safe bet would be, well, I have a USB-C dock. I don't know exactly what kind of USB-C cable it needs. In those scenarios, a lot of times just going with a passive Thunderbolt 3 cable will just work, because those passive Thunderbolt 3 cables are rated for extremely high data rates. They're well shielded, and they meet and beat all of the kind of normal USB-C cable requirements. So kind of as a worst case, that's almost a sure bet. USB-C cables themselves, like you said, it's a mixed bag of you never know what you're going to get. Oftentimes we do get, especially Mac customers will use the included cable from Apple because it's there and it's usually longer. But yeah, it's a charging only cable, and it'll just give you the kind of impression that the dock is bad when in reality it's just an incorrect cable type.
Yeah, no, it's confusing for consumers, but it's in the end what you just got to know is USB-C cables are not the same. The spec actually allows them to be quite different, and they are. Okay, great. So MJ actually asked, do you think DisplayLink will still be relevant once we start seeing USB 4 with the incorporation of PCI Express? So USB 4 takes a lot of the underlying technologies of Thunderbolt 3, including the routing of the PCI spec over this USB cable, which is basically what Thunderbolt 3 is doing also, and brings it from a technology kind of controlled by Intel and Apple alone into being a technology that is kind of owned by the USB standards body and called USB 4. And there's within that a lot of kind of interesting little differences. I'll jump to the chase on this one because this is a really complicated question. Will DisplayLink still be relevant in that? And I'll just say simply that we asked that question when DisplayPort over USB-C launched, and we asked that question when Thunderbolt 3 was launched, and we have been involved with every one of those technologies, and we weren't sure. I mean, in a sense, it was kind of up to the consumer and up to the industry in terms of the quality of the overall experience for the consumer. And the net of all that is there's still a lot of situations where the simplicity and the kind of just works aspect of DisplayLink actually wins the day. If I'm an IT director at a company and I want to buy a single dock that will work on all, and I'm a Windows, especially if I'm a Windows only shop, and probably only if I'm a Windows only shop, and I want a dock that's going to work without question without having to evaluate what systems I have and what's the kind of the perfect dock tailored for those systems, I'm going to choose a DisplayLink dock every time. In fact, still today, our top selling product is a DisplayLink dock called the UD3900. It's just simply a USB-A dock that it has a DisplayLink chip in it and supports 2 displays and then a whole bunch of other ports and network and audio. And if you've got a Windows laptop, even one that's 10 years old, that dock is going to work on it, and it's going to be a great choice. Another kind of thing in addition to kind of that IT scenario where you just want one dock that works. If you want to get to, for example, a trading desk or anybody who wants to get to 4 or 6 monitors, DisplayLink is really the only way you're going to be able to do that and be able to do that reliably. So for those kind of high number of display type setups, I mentioned the UD3900. We actually have newer models, like this one is the UD6950H. So this is a 4K monitors, which some people care about 4K, some don't. And our newer docks like this one, the UD6950H and UD3900H. So if you look for that H at the end, they all both come with a USB-A cable and a USB-C cable in the dock. And really, they're suitable on Windows systems, really about equally to kind of any USB-C or Thunderbolt 3 solution. You're going to have the slightly higher latency of DisplayLink, so it's not good for gaming or somebody who's really latency sensitive. And on those particular docks that I mentioned, because they support both A and C off the same product, you're not going to have certain USB-C features like charging. The only time you're going to be able to get charging in addition to all the other dock functionalities is if it's a USB-C only dock. And we do have docks that are that too, where it's a USB-C only DisplayLink dock And we have one that's coming that's USB-C only DisplayLink dock with charging. And actually, I think I can give you a preview of that actually. So this is the UD3900Z, and so this dock actually is not even released yet. This dock is on the water, which means it's actually on a container ship. 2,000 of these headed for the U.S. And will be released here in about 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. Kind of we have a lot of product launches planned, to continue to make sure that we've got kind of the full coverage of all the different, variations of the technology, so that we can cover all the scenarios and cover Mac, Windows, and Chromebook with great solutions. And there will always be something in the Plugable line that will be kind of the perfect match for a particular host system and a particular kind of set of usage constraints. Okay, great. I think we can maybe do, okay, so yeah, Gary mentioned that Apple discontinued the target display mode, and Josh mentioned that too, so that doesn't work. And Joe VT correctly mentioned DisplayLink is not limited by the number of connections from the GPU. That's exactly right, because DisplayLink is a virtual technology, really kind of software based on the computer, and then sending USB packets, standard USB packets, and then kind of the DisplayLink hardware does all the work after that. You can just keep attaching basically DisplayLink devices. You end up hitting some software limits, and we call out 6 right now on our listings, but actually in a few cases you can get a few more. Yeah. And let's see. Thank you, Joe VT, for lots of great kind of comments and information in there. And that's it. So really good discussion. Thank you so much, Josh, for joining me for this discussion. Because this is complicated stuff. In some ways, as a consumer, you don't want to have to know these underlying technologies. Whether it's DisplayLink or DisplayPort over USB-C or Thunderbolt 3. It's like when the consumer has to know things at that level, it seems like it's a bit much. But I mean, I think the way I'd summarize my recommendations is, if you have a Thunderbolt 3 laptop, go for a Thunderbolt 3 device. I mean, you're not going to be kind of disappointed in that. It's a kind of a well-tested, kind of well-regulated technology. There's a lot of extra testing that goes into Thunderbolt 3. So that's kind of a safe choice. That's a little bit up on the price point, but as long as you have a Thunderbolt 3 system, you're going to be happy. If you only need to get a single extra display, then DisplayPort over USB-C is good, and it's reliable in most cases. I mean, it's really only the most narrow corner cases where we have some of the problems that we were talking about, kind of with signal integrity and things like that we were talking about earlier in the call. But then if you want a solution for Windows that is kind of like simple and flexible and as reliable as you can get, basically from a hardware perspective, because it does some kind of simple magic on the hardware level, then any of the DisplayLink docks are a great choice. And Plugable has products in all of those areas. And Vanessa, thank you so much for the comment there, saying Plugable is my go-to source for Thunderbolt 3 products. Thank you for saying that. We have over 12 Thunderbolt 3 products and have been involved right from the beginning with Thunderbolt 3, and really love those products. So we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for everybody watching here this Plugable Office Hour live stream. I hope the information that we were able to provide is kind of helpful to have you understand this technology and what's possible. And thank you so much, Josh, for joining me. You have an amazing amount of knowledge about the nooks and crannies of all of these technologies, and
it's a lot of fun. It's a challenge, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Okay.
no problem.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be on answering questions on the chats even after the call or even days later when the video's up. So Plugable, we always welcome your questions. Thanks and bye.